A book on the shelf is just paper. A book in your mind is power. Welcome to Season 1, Money and Mindset. We are here to rewrite your internal script. Let's decode.
Most people think negotiation is about convincing.
But convincing assumes the other side is rational.
Chris Voss spent his career discovering the opposite.
In real negotiations, logic doesn't lead.
Emotion does.
And whoever controls emotional safety controls the outcome.
Today, we are decoding Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Not as a negotiation manual,
but as a map of how humans make decisions under pressure at work, with money, in conflict, and in everyday life.
So to really get into this, we have to start by, I think, tearing down the model that most of us were taught, the one that, we see in movies and read about in business books.
Exactly. Voss spends a huge amount of time at the beginning of the book just systematically dismantling what he calls the false model. And it's a model that is, it's completely rooted in this Enlightenment idea of the rational actor.
The idea that we can all just sit down at a table, put our feelings aside, and, work out the math of the problem.
That's it, precisely. It really operates on this fundamental assumption that when people are in conflict, they can and should just transform into these objective, logical problem solvers.
And that old framework is incredibly structured, almost like a clinical procedure, isn't it? It has these very clear rules.
Oh, absolutely. It's built on 4 main tenets, and they're all designed to sort of sanitize the conversation, to remove all the messy human stuff, the ego, the fear, the irrationality. On paper, it looks like a perfectly optimized system.
So what's the first tenet?
The first one demands that you separate the person from the problem. The idea is to treat the problem like a math equation that 2 engineers can solve together, completely separate from their identities or their emotions.
Okay, so step 1 is to pretend you're both robots. What's step 2?
Step 2 is to focus on interests, not positions. So don't get hung up on what they're asking for, which is their position. Instead, you're supposed to dig down to find out why they're asking for it, their underlying, supposedly rational interest.
Which then leads to the cooperative part.
Exactly. That's the third tenet. You jointly generate all these creative win-win options that give everyone more of what they want. It's all about collaboration, not a zero-sum fight.
And the final piece is establishing some kind of objective standard, some external criteria to judge the solution by so nobody's feelings get hurt.
Right. A clean, logical, step-by-step process. And it sounds great in a boardroom simulation or a university classroom, but Voss's whole point is that it completely and utterly collapses in the face of real high-stakes human conflict.
And he has the experience to back that up. This isn't just theory for him.
Not at all. He highlights this collapse by bringing in the raw, real-world context of the FBI's own history. His team found that this entire rational problem-solving method was just. It was fundamentally useless for dealing with the kind of extreme emotional volatility you see in life-or-death situations.
We're talking about really catastrophic events, right?
Yeah.
Things like the sieges at Ruby Ridge and Waco.
Exactly. Those were situations where the air was thick with deep-seated fear, paranoia, rage. These are not environments where you can just suggest a joint problem-solving mindset. Trying to do that when people genuinely believe their lives are on the line, it just doesn't compute.
So the core assumption of that whole model is what fails. The idea that you can just talk someone out of their fear.
That's the structural failure. The belief that the emotion, the animal side of the brain can be suppressed just by introducing a logical argument. When the stakes get high enough, that logical brain, the neocortex, it just goes offline. The negotiation stops being about data and becomes 100% about survival.
Which leads us straight into the actual mechanics of why we're so irrational. This isn't just an opinion. It's backed by a ton of modern psychology.
A massive amount. We now know, especially from the Nobel-winning work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, that people are just not the rational, self-interested creatures that classical economics always assumed we were. It's a fundamental misreading of human nature.
Because we're full of these cognitive biases.
Over 150 of them that have been identified. Our brains are constantly running these unconscious programs that actively distort our perception of reality. Our mind isn't an impartial computer waiting for data. It's a filtering machine that prioritizes everything based on emotional cues.
And Kahneman's dual system model is the perfect way to understand this. System 1 versus System 2.
It's the perfect lens. System 2 is the one we think is in charge. It's our slow, deliberate, logical mind, the one that requires real effort. But System 1, That's the fast, instinctive, automatic, and deeply emotional mind.
And the key insight from Voss is that System 1 is really the one running the show.
It's far more influential. It's not just a shortcut. System 1 is like the emotional current that steers the big, slow ship of System 2. All the gut feelings, the immediate impressions, the beliefs generated by System 1. That's the raw material that System 2 then uses to build its so-called logical conclusions.
So even our most carefully thought out decisions actually started as an emotional nudge.
Exactly. Which means if you can influence someone's System 1, their emotional frame, their gut reaction, you are essentially guiding their System 2 rationality. It's a form of control that completely bypasses intellectual argument.
There's that great example in the book with the Harvard negotiation student, Andy. It's almost painful to read.
It really is, because this student was specifically trained in the old model and was instructed to hold back a certain amount of money no matter what.
And yet Voss just dismantled him.
Yeah.
Not with logic, but with, these subtle emotional moves. He negotiated Andy down to his very last dime.
And it all hinged on one simple, calibrated question. Not a demand, not a fact, but a question. How am I supposed to do that?
That one question. What did it do psychologically?
It wasn't a request for data. It was a subtle emotional jab that spoke directly to Andy's System 1. It made him feel that his offer was inadequate and, crucially, that he now had a responsibility to help solve Voss's problem.
So his emotional mind accepted that reality first.
Yes. And then his System 2, the logical mind, just dutifully followed along, creating all the rationalizations for why giving up more money was the necessary and logical thing to do. The emotional frame shifted, and the logic just fell into line.
This completely flips our whole idea of negotiation on its head, especially when it comes to the idea of compromise.
Oh, absolutely. The idea of splitting the difference is so deeply baked into our culture as the definition of fairness. But Voss argues very convincingly that compromise is often the worst possible outcome.
Because it feels like an easy way out.
It feels like a shortcut to finishing, but it's usually just masking a huge failure. A failure to actually understand what the other side really needs. Neither side has to be creative, and both sides end up settling for something that is, suboptimal or even completely irrational.
He uses that great analogy of the couple arguing over shoes.
It's perfect. The wife wants the husband to wear black shoes. The husband wants to wear brown shoes, so they split the difference. He wears one black shoe and one brown shoe.
Which is completely absurd.
Of course. Because either extreme all black or all brown would have been a better, more coherent outcome. The compromise created a result that neither person actually wanted, and that is the definition of a failed negotiation. You've just split an outcome instead of creating any real value.
So if that rational model is a false map, we need to understand the real territory. And for Voss, that territory is the human nervous system.
That's it, exactly. The real battlefield isn't the conference table between two people. It's the internal physiological state of the person sitting across from you.
And everything is driven by these primal urges.
Every single human interaction, from a billion-dollar deal to arguing with your teenager about curfew, is driven by the same two universal primal needs. The need to feel safe and secure, and the need to feel in control.
And these are not logical needs. You can't reason with them.
No, they're wired deep into our oldest brain structures. They are urgent and completely illogical. So trying to argue against them, telling someone their fear isn't rational or their need for control is imaginary it's totally useless. You're arguing with a biological survival alarm.
And when people feel like they're not in control, they react in a very predictable way.
They adopt what he calls a hostage mentality, whether they're actually a hostage or just someone with a grievance at work. Neurologically, the reptilian brain and the limbic system, which governs survival and emotion, just completely overwhelm the rational prefrontal cortex.
And the result is they either lash out or shut down.
A sharp, involuntary shift. Extreme defensiveness, aggression, or just complete withdrawal. So when you try to back someone into a corner with pure logic, all you do is push them toward flight or, you get that counterfeit yes.
The yes they give you just to make the emotional pressure stop.
Precisely. They agree politely, but they have zero intention of ever following through. The commitment isn't real.
Which is why one of the most important strategic tools he introduces is just slowing down. Pacing.
It's absolutely essential. Rushing a negotiation is the fastest way to make someone feel like they're not being heard. And that immediately destroys any chance of building rapport or trust.
And there's actual research that shows time itself is a tool.
A powerful one. Just the passage of time can be a stabilizing force. When you deliberately slow the process down, you are naturally lowering the emotional temperature in the room. You're giving their limbic system a chance to calm down and allowing their rational brain to maybe come back online.
The quote from the book that really sticks with me is, if someone is talking, they're not shooting.
That captures the essence of it. The goal isn't to rush to a conclusion. The goal is just to keep the communication going, because the act of talking itself is inherently calming. It maintains the connection.
The 6-hour standoff in the Harlem high-rise is just an incredible example of this principle in action.
It's an unbelievable story of patience. The negotiators didn't even have a phone number. They were literally talking through a closed apartment door for 6 straight hours, rotating in shifts.
And getting nothing back for most of that time.
For the vast majority of it, absolutely zero verbal response from the fugitives inside. But they just kept going, calmly, consistently, just describing what the people inside were probably feeling, using a non-threatening, reassuring tone of voice.
And eventually, it worked.
It did. The fugitives came out and surrendered peacefully, and when they were asked why, they said the negotiators just calmed us down. And crucially, they made them believe they weren't going away. That persistence broke through the panic and the feeling of isolation.
So that sustained patient communication was the tool that allowed their rational minds to re-engage.
It let the emotional heat just dissipate. Which brings us to the next logical question. If slowing down is the strategy, what do you actually do with that time?
And that leads us right to the core concept of tactical empathy. And we have to be really clear about what this means. It's not about being kind or nice.
No, that's a critical distinction. This is not a soft skill. It's a hard structural mechanic for emotional analysis. Tactical empathy is defined as the ability to see the world from the other person's perspective, to understand their emotional reality and quickly assess what's driving them. It is a calculated, strategic act.
The key being that you don't have to agree with them at all.
Not in the slightest. You can think their worldview is completely insane, but by simply verbalizing their situation and articulating their emotions, you send a powerful signal. I am listening to you. I understand you.
And that acknowledgement is where the influence comes from.
That's the leverage. The more accurately you can perceive and articulate the emotions of the person across from you, the more power you gain to frame the interaction and guide where it goes next. It's high-level emotional intelligence used for a strategic purpose.
Okay, so the first tool for actually doing this, for operationalizing tactical empathy, is mirroring.
Right, which has a technical psychological name, isopraxism. And it's something we all do unconsciously. It's this neurobehavioral reflex where we start copying the speech patterns, the tone, the body language of people we feel comfortable and safe with.
Why do we do that?
Because we are biologically hardwired to fear what's different and to be drawn to what's similar. Mirroring is this unconscious, nonverbal signal that says, hey, trust me, we're on the same team. It builds that immediate low-level rapport.
So the FBI technique is just to do this consciously, and it's incredibly simple.
Deceptively simple. You just repeat the last 1 to 3 words or the critical 1 to 3 words of what your counterpart just said.
And that's it.
That's it. And that simple act of repetition triggers that mirroring instinct in them. It keeps the connection alive, and almost without fail, it prompts them to elaborate, to give you more information. You don't have to ask a question or propose a solution. You just reflect their own words back at them.
And this isn't just for high-stakes situations. The proof of this is everywhere.
It is. That study with the waiters is just a perfect example. The group of waiters who were instructed to mirror their customers' orders back to them verbatim, okay, so that's a medium rare steak with the mashed potatoes. They got tips that were, on average, a staggering 70% larger than the waiters who just used positive reinforcement, like, great choice.
70%, that's huge.
It's massive. And all it is a small act of acknowledgement. It signals, I heard you, and I am like you. And that leads to dramatically better outcomes, even in a quick, purely financial interaction.
Okay, so after mirroring, the next layer of tactical empathy is labeling.
Right. And labeling is a shortcut to intimacy. But more importantly, it's a tool for disrupting and calming intense negative emotions.
And it works pretty much like it sounds. You just name the emotion.
You verbalize their emotion, but you do it tentatively. You use phrases like, it seems like, or it looks like, it sounds like you're feeling frustrated. You're giving their feeling a name and showing that you've identified their emotional state.
The neurological effect of this is really the deepest mechanic in the entire book. It's not just a psychological trick. It's changing their brain activity.
It physically shifts brain activity. We know this from fMRI studies. When you ask someone to put a name to an emotion they're feeling, activity moves away from the amygdala, which is the brain's fear and threat generator, and it shifts to the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex,
The rational part of the brain.
the part that governs rational thought and language. So, in simple terms, by naming a fear, you force the brain to process it logically instead of just reacting to it viscerally. You are literally short-circuiting the raw fear response.
This is why those negotiators in Harlem said things like, "It seems like you don't want to go back to jail."
Exactly. They labeled the biggest fear in the room. And that simple act moved the fugitives from a state of raw panic toward a state where they could actually make a strategic decision.
And the strategy says you have to label the negative emotions first. You can't just ignore them.
You have to clear the road. You label the fears, the anxieties, the frustrations first. That creates psychological safety and trust before you ever introduce a solution or make a request. You're removing the big emotional boulders from the path before you ask them to walk down it.
So this all builds to what seems like a really subtle point, but one Voss says is the most critical verbal distinction of all. The difference between hearing "you're right" and "that's right."
It seems like a tiny difference, but the gap between them is enormous. "You're right" is more often than not a way to end a conversation. It's a defensive move.
It's what you say to someone you want to get rid of.
Exactly. It's a polite nod. It signals a kind of superficial theoretical agreement, but there's no personal ownership of the conclusion, no intention to actually change behavior.
So how is "that's right" different?
That's right, is the breakthrough. It's the moment of epiphany. It signals that your counterpart has listened to your summary of their situation, they've processed it, and they have declared it to be correct of their own free will. It's a moment of internalization.
And that's the stealth victory.
That's it. The psychological barriers just dissolve in that moment. It's the green light that tells you the negotiation can finally move forward from deadlock. Because when they say "that's right," it means they feel profoundly seen and understood.
The example with a pharmaceutical sales rep and the skeptical doctor really illustrates this.
It's perfect. She didn't start with a technical pitch about her product. She started by summarizing his emotional reality. She talked about his passion for creating these highly customized treatment plans for his most complex patients.
And that got his attention.
He literally paused, looked up from his papers, and said, "That's right, I really feel like I'm treating an epidemic here." In that instant, because she had acknowledged his core identity as this passionate caretaker, that wall of skepticism just crumbled.
And only then, after getting that buy-in, could she talk about her product.
Only after she got a second. That's right. By summarizing his challenges back to him. The breakthrough had nothing to do with the drug's technical merits. It was all about confirming his passion and his professional identity.
The ability to get to "that's right" really reveals this paradox of control that runs through the whole book. You're getting control by giving it away.
Exactly. You regulate the interaction by granting the other person autonomy and a feeling of safety.
And this whole strategy really begins by completely reframing how we think about the word "no."
We are all conditioned to fear no. We think it's the end of the line, a final rejection.
But Voss says it's not.
Not at all.
Yeah.
He says no is almost never a final rational decision. It's usually a temporary emotional reaction designed to maintain the status quo. It's a self-protection mechanism against the anxiety and risk that comes with change.
So hearing "no" isn't the end of the negotiation.
It's the real beginning. Getting them to say no early on is actually a strategic goal, because the moment they say it, they feel protected, they feel in control, they've drawn a line. And once they feel safe, they can finally relax and actually start to consider what you're saying.
This all ties into the psychological principle that autonomy disarms our defenses.
It does. It has roots in the work of Carl Rogers and his idea of unconditional positive regard. The idea that for real gut-level behavioral change to happen, not just temporary compliance, you have to create an environment of acceptance.
And if you push too hard for yes, you get the opposite. You trigger those defenses.
And you get the counterfeit yes. The agreement that sounds great in the moment but has absolutely no substance behind it.
He uses that powerful analogy of the open heart surgery patient.
It's a perfect illustration of temporary compliance. Patient is so grateful to the surgeon, they promise, "Yes, absolutely, I will change my diet, I'll start exercising, I'll change my whole lifestyle." The data shows that over 90% of them go right back to their old habits within 2 years. That yes they gave was rooted in fear and gratitude. It was an emotional response to relieve the tension in the room. It wasn't a deep, internalized commitment to change.
So to avoid that, you actually use no-oriented questions.
Exactly. You ask questions that are specifically designed to get a negative response right from the start.
Like, is this a bad time to talk?
Or, have you given up on this project? The other person gets to say no, and in doing so, they immediately feel like they're in the driver's seat. They've exercised control, and that dramatically lowers their resistance to whatever you're going to say next.
But since the goal is real commitment, not just a hollow agreement, you have to be able to spot that counterfeit yes.
You have to be relentless about it, and that's where the rule of 3 comes in. It's a system to verify commitment.
You have to get them to agree to the same thing 3 times.
3 times in the same conversation, but using different methods so you don't sound like you're interrogating them. The first is their initial yes. The second might be a summary that gets you that critical, that's right. And the third, and most important, is a calibrated how or what question about implementation.
Something that forces them to describe what success looks like in their own words.
Exactly. And you also have to listen for the red flags in their language. Voss points out that if you push for implementation and you hear the phrase, "I'll try," that should be a massive warning bell.
Because I'll try really means I'm planning to fail.
It often means, I know I can't do this, but I'm saying this to make you go away. It signals a total lack of ownership in the outcome. When you hear that, you have to dive right back in with those how questions until the terms of execution are crystal clear. Agreement without implementation is worthless.
This brings us to the actual mechanics of these questions, the calibrated questions that shift the cognitive burden.
This is the real engine of the method. It's not about being persuasive. It's about a quiet, strategic redirection of responsibility.
So what exactly is a calibrated question?
It's a query that the other person can answer, but it doesn't have a simple, fixed yes or no answer. It's an open-ended question that's carefully targeted at a specific problem, and it forces them to think.
And it serves a few functions at once.
A few critical functions. First, it buys you time. Second, it constrains their thinking by focusing them on the problem you want them to solve. And third, it gives them the illusion of control because they're the one doing the hard work and coming up with the answers.
And it takes the aggression out of the conversation.
Completely. You can introduce a really difficult request or idea without sounding pushy at all because you're framing it as though you're asking for their help and their expertise.
And the wording is key. You have to avoid certain verbs.
You have to avoid verbs like can, is, are, do, will, anything that can be answered with a simple fact. The power is in 2 words, how and what.
And the single greatest calibrated question of all time, according to Voss, is how am I supposed to do that?
It's just genius in its simplicity. It's such a natural, innocent-sounding thing to say. But it instantly forces the other person to pause, to stop advocating for their position and to start thinking about how to solve your problem.
It reframes the whole interaction.
Instantly. You're no longer adversaries. You're 2 people looking at a shared roadblock.
And this works even when there's a serious power imbalance, like with the consultant who is owed a lot of money.
That's a perfect case study. The client was months behind on invoices, but was asking for more work. She didn't get angry or make threats.
You just asked the question.
She calmly said, I'd love to help, but how am I supposed to do that given the current situation with the outstanding invoices?
And the client didn't take it as an attack.
Not at all. He heard it as a practical problem that needed a solution. He actually apologized, explained their internal payment issues, and had her paid in full within 48 hours. He felt like he had fixed a technical issue, not that he had caved to a demand.
Because yes is useless without how.
It's the core principle. An agreement is just a word. The how is the path to execution. And you have to make sure that path is defined in their own voice.
So you ask those key implementation questions.
How will we know we're on track? And how will we address things if we find we're off track? When they answer those questions for you and you summarize it back to them to get that final, that's right, you have genuine buy-in. You have commitment.
It's what he calls listener's judo.
A perfect term for it. You're not fighting them head on. You're using their own energy, their own momentum, their own desire to solve problems, to guide them toward the objective you want to reach.
This all hinges on emotional perception, which brings us to the concept of fairness. Such a loaded word.
It's one of the most powerful emotional levers there is. And we have to be clear, fairness is not an objective, calculable state. It is a feeling. It's an emotional stabilizer.
And we know emotion is essential for decision-making.
Absolutely. The neuroscientist Antonio Damasio did that pivotal research with patients who had damage to the emotion-generating parts of their brains. They couldn't make even the simplest decisions, like what to eat for lunch. Logic alone is paralyzing.
The ultimatum game is another perfect example of this.
It shows how powerfully the feeling of unfairness can override pure logic. You give two people $10, one person proposes a split. If the proposer offers a really unfair split, say $9 for them and one for the other person, the second person will very often reject the offer.
So they get nothing.
They choose to get $0 rather than accept $1 because the emotional insult of being treated unfairly is more powerful than the logical gain of $1.
This is why negotiators use what's called an extreme anchor to manipulate that sense of fairness.
Right. They'll start with a ridiculously low or high offer. It's designed to be an emotional punch in the mouth. It throws the other person completely off balance and makes their initial position suddenly seem extreme and unreasonable.
And it leverages our deep-seated fear of loss aversion.
A hugely powerful motivator. We are far more driven by the desire to avoid a loss than we are by the desire to achieve an equivalent gain. Losing $100 hurts way more than finding $100 feels good.
So the negotiator sets expectations incredibly low with that first anchor.
They anchor your emotions in a state of disappointment or even shock. From that point on, any improvement, no matter how small, feels like a massive victory because you're successfully avoiding that initial painful loss.
The example of Voss telling his contractors he had to cut their pay is just a masterclass in this.
It's incredible. He had to tell them their daily rate was going from $2,000 down to just $500. That's the kind of news that should start a riot.
But it didn't, because he didn't lead with the number.
No. He anchored their emotions first. He spent time describing the client's financial crisis, the project being on the verge of collapse, the very real possibility that all the work was about to disappear completely. He made them feel the full weight of a total loss first.
And only then did he present the $500 offer.
Only after they were mentally prepared for zero. And he framed it as a scarce opportunity that he could take elsewhere. He gave them the control.
So in their minds, the call was no longer about a massive pay cut.
It was about how to avoid losing this $500 a day opportunity to someone else. It completely reframed their perception. And every single contractor took the deal immediately without a counteroffer.
To make these anchors even stronger, he talks about the power of using specific, non-round numbers.
Yes, because a number like $50,000 feels like a placeholder, I guess. Feels soft and negotiable.
But a number like $48,753?
That feels like it's the result of a careful, precise calculation. It has weight. It has gravity. It signals that you've done your homework and this isn't a number you just pulled out of the air. It feels serious and permanent.
This is all systematized in what he calls the Ackerman model.
Right, which is a structured way to be assertive with your numbers without getting dragged into that split the difference compromise trap. You set your target, start with an aggressive anchor at 65% of that target, and then make a series of raises in decreasing increments.
And the decreasing increments are the psychological key.
That's the whole magic of it. The gap between your offers gets smaller and smaller. It convinces the other side that they are squeezing every last drop out of you. They feel like they're fighting for every penny and winning a hard-fought battle.
So they feel like they got a fair deal.
They feel like they won. And that emotional need for fairness is satisfied even though you landed exactly on the number you intended to from the very beginning.
Okay, so let's move from the conscious tactics to the hidden dynamics, the things you can't see. Let's talk about black swans.
The unknown unknowns. This is where negotiation goes from a chess match to, three-dimensional chess. A black swan is that hidden piece of information that, if you can uncover it, changes everything. It shatters the entire frame of the negotiation.
And these could be anything. Fear, pressure from a boss, an issue of identity.
Any hidden constraint or driver. And the mindset you need to find them is one of intense, adaptive listening. You have to stop looking for evidence that confirms what you already believe. You have to actively hunt for the piece of information that makes no sense, the thing that contradicts everything else.
The Chase Manhattan bank robbery is such a great example of an identity-based black swan.
A classic. The lead robber, Chris Voss, kept talking about we and they. He kept referring to the other four robbers who were supposedly calling the shots.
But that was a lie.
It was a complete fabrication, a psychological defense mechanism to deflect responsibility and make himself seem less powerful than he was. The black swan was the discovery that there were no other robbers. He was the ringleader. And his accomplice was basically his hostage. Uncovering that hidden reality was the only way to resolve the situation.
And these black swans often show up as incongruity, a mismatch between words and body language.
Absolutely. When you ask for a commitment and you get a hesitant yes, while the person is sort of shrinking in their chair, that's a huge red flag. That's a black swan trying to surface.
And you have to label it.
Immediately. I heard you say yes, but it sounded like there was some hesitation there. It seems like something about this is making you uncomfortable. You have to drag that hidden fear or constraint out into the light so you can deal with it. Otherwise, your deal is built on sand.
Because people will often reject great offers for reasons that have nothing to do with the offer itself.
They're driven by hidden agendas. The corporate deal that fell apart, not over price, but because the division head felt personally insulted by the very idea that his team needed training. His ego, his status, that was the black swan. It had nothing to do with the financials.
This points to the problem of the behind-the-table deal killers, the people who aren't even in the room.
Right. It only takes one hidden influencer, one disgruntled manager, one person on the legal team to silently kill a deal. The person you're talking to is often not the only person you're negotiating with.
So you have to use calibrated questions to map out that hidden landscape.
You have to ask things like, how does this affect everyone else on your team? Or how on board is the rest of your organization with this plan? You are proactively searching for those unseen constraints and influencers who are operating behind the scenes.
When we zoom out from all of this, we start to see that this isn't just a toolkit for formal negotiations. This is a model for continuous interaction with reality.
That is the deeper pattern. The skills mirroring, labeling, calibrated questions, they apply everywhere. Salary discussions, corporate meetings, personal relationships with your partner or your kids. It's all negotiation.
Because it's a model for humanizing conflict.
Yes. Our deep primal instinct is to avoid conflict because it feels threatening to our place in the tribe. This whole approach is a structured way to navigate that fear, to manage conflict with empathy and build trust through emotional understanding, not through brute force or logic.
And once you have that trust, you can tap into the real drivers of motivation people's hopes and dreams.
Exactly. Once you truly understand someone's unattained goals, their core values, what Voss calls their religion, you can achieve what he terms followability. People will naturally follow someone who demonstrates a genuine passion for their goals and has a clear plan to help them get there.
So we've decoded this entire emotional architecture. Let's give our listeners a filter they can start using right now in their own conversations.
This is the awareness lens we want you to take away. It's simple. Notice when a conversation shifts from seeking solution clarity to seeking emotional distance. That's the pivot point. That's when the nervous system has taken over from the rational mind.
And what are the signs of that shift?
The language changes. Listen for the overuse of third-person pronouns, we, they, as a way to deflect personal responsibility, just like the bank robber did.
Or listen for that status quo language.
Exactly. The quick, defensive, you're right, or the non-committal, I'll try, especially right after you've made a perfectly logical point. That's your signal that the conversation is no longer about the facts. It has become entirely about them managing their own internal emotional safety or hiding some invisible constraint.
And this awareness is more critical now than ever. The Voss model is just so much better suited to the world we live in.
It really is. In this crazy attention economy with algorithmic pressure and constant digital noise, our fast, instinctive System 1 brains are being triggered all day long. We're all living in a state of low-grade emotional overwhelm.
Which means we're all making more impulsive, more emotional decisions.
We are. And in that environment, the ability to be the person who can stabilize the nervous system of others, to label their stress, to affirm their sense of control, to ask how we can get through this, that becomes the real currency of influence.
Whoever can provide that emotional stability is the one who shapes reality and ultimately the outcome. This book isn't about winning negotiations.
It's about understanding why people resist reality and how that resistance is shaped.
Chris Voss doesn't teach dominance.
He exposes where control already exists inside emotion.
And once you see that compromise, stops looking fair and starts looking lazy.
If this episode made you notice tension before words, the decoding worked.
We don't replace books, we decode them.
You've reached the end of this exploration, but not the end of the idea. Let it echo. Let it integrate. And when you're ready for the next step, return to Decoded by Morrow. Wisdom is a journey, not a conclusion. Let's decode.